What would happen if every immigrant in America disappeared tomorrow? The answer isn't just shocking, it threatens the very core of the U.S. economy. Imagine waking up to find over 45 million people missing. That's the foreign-born population of the United States, about 1 in every 7 residents. It includes not just recent arrivals or undocumented migrants, but naturalized citizens, green card holders, and visa workers. It's an invisible backbone that quietly holds much of the American economy in place. Without them, the system wouldn't just bend, it would break. The first and most immediate shock would hit the labor market. Immigrants make up more than 17% of the U.S. labor force. In some industries, that percentage is far higher. Agriculture? More than 70% of farm workers are immigrants, many of them undocumented. Hospitality? Nearly a third. Construction? Around 1 in 4. In major cities, it's even more concentrated. A sudden disappearance would mean entire sectors grinding to a halt. Crops left unpicked, homes unfinished, hotels closed. And it wouldn't stop there. The restaurant industry would see widespread closures within days. According to the National Restaurant Association, immigrants represent more than 23% of food service workers. Dishwashers, cooks, delivery drivers, managers. They don't just staff the kitchens, they keep them alive. The ripple effect would hit suppliers, logistics, and retail. If you think the COVID-era supply chain disruptions were bad, imagine a labor vacuum this size. Healthcare would take a brutal hit. Immigrants comprise more than 28% of physicians and surgeons in the United States. Among home health aides and nursing assistants, nearly 1 in 4 is foreign-born. And it's not just quantity, it's critical quality. Immigrants often take hard-to-fill positions in underserved areas, especially rural clinics and urban hospitals. The disappearance would disproportionately affect the most vulnerable, the elderly, low-income families, and communities already facing provider shortages. Then comes the housing sector. Immigrants are responsible for a substantial portion of new home construction and renovation. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Houston, they account for more than half of construction labor. Suddenly, removing that workforce would freeze thousands of projects. Housing costs, already a national crisis, would skyrocket as supply evaporates and existing demand remains unchanged. Landlords and developers would lose revenue, local governments would lose tax income, and renters would suffer. Let's talk taxes. In 2019, immigrants paid over $405 billion in taxes, federal, state, and local. That includes income, property, and sales taxes. Of that, over $30 billion came from undocumented immigrants alone. They contribute without receiving many of the benefits citizens take for granted, like Social Security or Medicare. Their disappearance wouldn't just create labor gaps. It would blow a hole in government budgets, leading to cuts in public services, infrastructure, and education. Consumer spending would collapse. Immigrants don't just work. They also buy, rent, save, and invest. In 2021, immigrant households wielded over $1.3 trillion in spending power. That's trillions moving through small businesses, banks, and supermarkets. Remove that demand, and thousands of businesses, especially in immigrant-rich communities, would fail. This isn't just about economics. It's about livelihoods and local survival. Education would be hit hard, too. While it might seem that fewer students could ease classroom overcrowding, the opposite could happen. School districts with large immigrant populations rely on federal funding tied to enrollment numbers. A sudden drop in student count would result in budget cuts, layoffs, and school closures. Meanwhile, bilingual educators, ESL specialists, and cultural liaisons, many of whom are immigrants themselves, would vanish, removing vital support systems for all students. Let's not forget entrepreneurship. Immigrants are more likely to start businesses than native-born Americans. In fact, they represent about 21% of all U.S. entrepreneurs, running everything from tech startups to neighborhood laundromats. They generate jobs, attract investment, and drive innovation. With them gone, entire commercial strips in cities like Miami, San Francisco, and Chicago would go dark. And it's not just local. Major companies like Google, Tesla, and Intel all trace their roots to immigrant founders or their children. This all leads to a broader economic reckoning. The U.S. GDP would take a massive hit. Estimates suggest that without immigrants, America's economic output could drop by nearly 10% over the next decade. The labor shortage would force employers to raise wages, which sounds good, until you realize the cost would be passed on to consumers. Inflation would surge, with essentials like food, housing, and healthcare becoming even less affordable. And there's a demographic time bomb ticking in the background. Native-born Americans are aging rapidly. Without immigration, the U.S. would face a shrinking workforce and declining birth rates, a problem already haunting countries like Japan and Italy. Immigrants help balance this by being younger on average and more likely to start families. Their disappearance would accelerate population decline, reduce tax revenues, and strain social safety nets like Social Security and Medicare, which depend on a growing base of working-age contributors. All of this makes it clear the United States is not just supported by immigrants, it's inseparable from them. Their labor, taxes, entrepreneurship, and families are embedded in the DNA of the economy. The absence of immigrants wouldn't just be a loss, it would be a slow-motion collapse, unraveling systems that have quietly depended on them for decades. And yet, this is only part of the picture. The second half of this simulation reveals the deeper, long-term consequences on innovation, global competitiveness, and the very idea of the American dream. Stick around. What's coming next might just redefine how we see the future of the country. Beyond the initial collapse, labor shortages, inflation, failing industries, the long-term impact of a U.S. without immigrants cuts into the very structure of progress, innovation, and identity. It doesn't just threaten how the country runs day to day, it threatens how America stays ahead, or even afloat, in the decades to come. Start with technology. The United States has led the world in tech innovation for decades. But what's often overlooked is who's been leading it. Over 75% of tech companies in Silicon Valley have at least one immigrant founder. More than half of all unicorn startups, that is, private companies valued at over $1 billion, were founded by immigrants. Google, Uber, SpaceX. Immigrants have not just filled jobs, they've created entire industries. Without them, the U.S. risks falling behind in the global innovation race. Countries like Canada, Germany, and Australia are already competing aggressively for top international talent. They offer faster visa pathways, streamlined immigration policies, and attractive education incentives. If America closes the door to immigrants, or loses them entirely, it's not just losing workers, it's handing over its competitive edge to other nations. Then there's higher education, a pillar of America's intellectual and economic influence. Immigrants and international students make up over 1 million enrolled in U.S. colleges and universities, many in advanced fields like engineering, computer science, and biomedical research. These students inject billions into the economy annually and often go on to become professors, researchers, and founders. Remove them, and top-tier universities like MIT, Stanford, and UC Berkeley lose both talent and funding. That drains innovation from the root. Science and medicine suffer too. Over 25% of Nobel Prizes awarded to Americans in recent decades have gone to immigrants. Foreign-born scientists lead cutting-edge research in everything from AI to climate science to cancer treatments. Strip them out, and American research loses momentum. Global prestige fades. Breakthroughs slow. It also means the military would quietly lose key personnel. Immigrants serve in every branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. More than 5,000 active duty members are non-citizens. Many work in critical translation, engineering, or medical roles that are difficult to fill. Their loss would create operational vulnerabilities, especially in intelligence and overseas missions. And remember, military service is often a path to citizenship. Take that away, and recruitment gets even harder. Meanwhile, America's cultural and political narrative begins to erode. For centuries, the country's strength came not just from its resources or geography, but from its ability to attract dreamers, risk-takers, and builders from around the world. Immigrants brought new ideas, new energy, and new perspectives. They challenged norms. They built movements. They expanded the definition of what America could be. Without them, The national identity shifts. Diversity fades. The melting pot becomes homogeneous and stagnant. Cities lose their character. Food, music, languages, and traditions that once defined entire communities begin to disappear. The cultural richness that made American life dynamic and adaptable begins to wither. And then comes the final blow: demographics. Without immigrants and their children, the U.S. population would age dramatically. By the year 2050, more than 1 in 5 Americans would be over 65. The working age population would shrink while demand for healthcare, pensions, and senior support explodes. Social Security, already under stress, would collapse without enough workers to fund it. Medicare costs would skyrocket. There simply wouldn't be enough young people to carry the load. That's a pattern already unfolding in other aging societies. Japan, for example, has struggled for years with economic stagnation and a shrinking workforce due to low birth rates and strict immigration policies. The U.S. is heading in the same direction, unless immigration offsets that trend. And here's the irony: even as political debates rage about immigration, the economic math is clear. The U.S. doesn't just benefit from immigrants, it depends on them. They are not replacements, they are reinforcements, coming at a time when the country can least afford to stand still. Removing them wouldn't solve problems, it would multiply them. What would America look like without the minds behind its labs, the hands that build its homes, the hearts that care for its elderly, and the dreams that push its economy forward? It wouldn't just look different, it wouldn't function. So now the question is yours. If immigrants disappeared tomorrow, how long could America really last?